They said the boy was broken. Maybe they were right, Caleb thought, as he stacked hay bales along the weathered fence line at Red Rock Ranch. His hands moved automatically, one after another, hefting the straw higher, sweat darkening the back of his faded t-shirt. The morning sun blazed over the high Nevada desert, but Caleb didn't flinch or shield his eyes. He worked in silence. He always did. Most kids his age, 16, gangly and growing, would be griping about chores, but not Caleb. He hadn't spoken a word in a year, not since the night everything changed. Across the corral, a black Mustang the size of a nightmare was raising hell. Dust flew in angry clouds as the stallion spun, reared, and crashed his hooves against the iron gate. The force rattled the entire pen, and even from 30 feet away, Caleb could feel it in his bones. Ranch hands gave the pen a wide berth. They muttered about the wild horse, calling him names. Devil, brute, lost cause. But not Uncle Ray, and not Caleb either. Caleb paused, hay bale in hand, and watched the horse. Muscles rippled under Ash's coal-black coat, his mane flying in wild tangles. His nostrils flared, eyes rolling white, every line of his body screaming fury and fear. Yet something about Ash's storm drew Caleb in. Maybe it was the familiarity, the way pain hid behind violence, how chaos was just another form of grief. The other ranch hands, older cowboys and tough women with sunburnt faces, all kept their distance. "That one'll kill you just for looking," a grizzled wrangler had joked the first night Caleb arrived. Nobody laughed. Not really. They all knew Ash was untouchable. No one had ever gotten close, not even with food, not even with threats. The Mustang had scars down his flank that said he'd fought every hand that tried. Caleb finished his chore and quietly brushed his jeans off. The silence wrapped around him like armor. He didn't want to talk. Didn't need to. Words were for people who still believed someone would listen. Instead, he let his gaze drift to Ash, lingering on the animal's trembling sides, and the wild, unbroken power in his stance. Sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, Caleb would lie awake in his narrow bed, listening to coyotes wailing at the moon and horses shifting in their stalls. He'd think about that night, a year ago, the screaming, the flames, the searing heat, and remember his little sister's hand slipping from his in the smoke. He'd been told over and over, "You're lucky you survived." Lucky, they said. He didn't feel lucky. He felt empty. Uncle Ray, his mother's only brother, had taken him in after the fire. Ray wasn't much for words either, but he believed in hard work, early mornings, and second chances for people and animals alike. The ranch on the edge of the desert wasn't fancy. It was a patchwork of battered fences, corrals, and red barns surrounded by endless miles of sand, sagebrush, and sky. But it was home to 11 rescued Mustangs, each one wilder, more battered, and more mistrustful than the last, especially Ash. The daily rhythm of Red Rock Ranch was the same every morning. Wake at dawn, feed the horses, haul hay, check fences, and repeat. Most days, Caleb faded into the background, just another shadow on the sun-bleached dirt. Sometimes he wondered if he'd become invisible, a ghost drifting through someone else's life. But today was different. Today, Ash's rage seemed more frantic than usual, as if something unseen was pressing on him. The stallion wheeled in his pen, nostrils quivering, tail lashing the air like a whip. A cluster of tourists, city folks from the new hiking resort down the road, watched from a safe distance, their cell phones ready, murmuring in low voices. "Now, that one's a real piece of work," a ranch hand told them, jerking a thumb at Ash. "Ain't nobody tamed him yet." Caleb felt the prickle of eyes on his back, but kept working. He could sense the judgments, the pity, the curiosity. The silent boy and the savage stallion, an odd pair, even here. Uncle Ray's truck rattled up the drive, tires crunching gravel. He climbed out, boots thudding, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the yard. He gave Caleb a nod, approval, not praise. That was enough. "Morning, Caleb. You keeping busy?" Ray called out, voice low and rough as the desert itself. Caleb nodded, meeting Ray's gaze for a brief moment before looking away. Ray understood. He didn't push. He never asked Caleb to talk or dredge up the past. He just kept giving him space and trust, like he did for the horses. Suddenly, a loud crash split the air. Ash had struck the gate with full force, sending a tremor down the fence. The mustang snorted, foam flecking his lips, and pawed the ground. The tourists gasped, a woman clutching her husband's arm as if the beast might leap over the fence. "Don't get too close," Ray warned. "He's not ready for visitors." One little girl, her hair in braids, stared at Caleb. "Why's that horse so mad?" she whispered. Her mother pulled her away, shushing her, but Caleb kept thinking about the question. Why was Ash so angry? Why did he fight every hand that tried to help him? Maybe, he thought, it was the same reason he couldn't speak. Some wounds go too deep for words. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the yard, Caleb finished stacking hay and moved toward the water troughs. Ash's wild eyes never left him, tracking his every move with a mixture of suspicion and something else. Something almost like recognition. He felt the urge to walk over, to just sit by the fence, to see if the horse would calm, if he wasn't being watched or threatened. But a memory flickered. Flames, smoke, the sound of someone screaming for help. His breath caught, his hands trembling slightly. He shoved the feeling down. Just another chore, just another day. But as he walked past Ash's pen, he paused. For a moment the world stilled. Caleb and the Mustang stared at each other, two souls lost in silence, both carrying scars no one else could see. From across the ranch, Ray watched. He saw the moment, saw how neither boy nor stallion flinched. The rest of the world moved on. But something unspoken passed between them. A silent promise, a challenge, or maybe a shared longing for peace. The day rolled forward. Tourists drifted off, chores continued, and the desert wind picked up, rattling the old windmill and carrying the sharp scent of sage. But that moment hung in the air like a held breath. That night, as the ranch settled into darkness and the stars blazed overhead, Caleb lay awake, replaying the image of Ash. Wild, broken, angry, but so alive. He wondered if it was possible to save something so hurt, to earn trust with nothing but patience and silence. Maybe, just maybe, the answer was yes. Before the house fire, Caleb had a little sister named Ellie. She was small for her age, always tagging along after her big brother, her laughter ringing through their old house like chimes on a summer breeze. Ellie was fearless, climbing trees, chasing after stray cats, even sneaking carrots to the neighbors' horses despite their mother's warnings. She believed Caleb could do anything, fix anything, save anyone. On that night, fire swept through their world with a hunger that cared nothing for love or laughter. It was late, a Friday. Caleb remembered the way the house smelled of popcorn, the faint echo of their mother's favorite music still playing when the smoke alarm screamed to life. Everything blurred after that. Ellie's tiny hand clutching his, her face pale and eyes wide in the roiling blackness, the heat pressing against them like a living thing. He tried, God, how he tried, to drag her through the thick, burning dark. He screamed for help, his voice breaking, lungs seared raw, but the flames closed in too fast. Ellie slipped away. The last thing he heard was her voice, whispering his name. When they pulled him out, coughing, burned, half-conscious, they told him he was lucky to be alive. But from that night on, Caleb never spoke again. The authorities said he needed time to heal. After the funeral, after the endless hospital visits, after his mother broke down and couldn't look at him without crying, Caleb was sent to Red Rock Ranch. His Uncle Ray, a man he barely remembered from childhood holidays, picked him up in an old pickup truck and drove him 4 hours out into the nowhere of Nevada, past dry riverbeds and endless stretches of sage. Ray didn't ask questions. He didn't offer false comfort or tell Caleb it would all be okay. He just drove, the radio low, the windows cracked to let in the desert air. When they pulled up to the ranch, Ray nodded toward the barn. "This is your room?" he said. "Breakfast at 5. Work starts at 6. Caleb followed, silent, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He found the room small and spare, but clean. The walls were hung with old rodeo posters and a single photograph, a woman with laughing eyes astride a paint mare, waving at the camera. He'd learn later that she was Aunt Maggie, Ray's late wife, a woman known in the county as a horse whisperer, famous for her way with the wildest, most broken animals. The first few days at Red Rock blurred together. Caleb drifted from chore to chore, eyes on the ground, a ghost among the living. The ranch bustled with activity, Ray and the hands managing fences, hay deliveries, paperwork, volunteers coming and going, the whinny of horses at sunrise and the crunch of boots on gravel. Everyone seemed to know he was the boy from the fire. They looked at him with a mix of pity and uncertainty, as if they might catch his silence like a cold. Most days, Caleb gravitated to the corrals where the mustangs roamed. There were 11 in all, each with a history written in scars and wary eyes. Mira, a gentle sorrel mare with a white blaze, was the friendliest, always leaning over the fence for a scratch. But it was Ash who drew Caleb's gaze. A black mustang with a wild mane and a temper to match. No one approached Ash. His pen was double-fenced, the gate chained tight. Some nights, Caleb watched the stallion pacing the perimeter, restless as a storm about to break. Caleb learned to move quietly, to keep his head down. Ray assigned him to feed the horses, muck out stalls, and haul water. Chores that kept his hands busy and his mind just numb enough. He noticed details no one else seemed to. The way Ash's ears flicked when anyone passed. The new bite marks on Mira's flank from a scuffle. How the old barn door creaked in the wind. But no matter what he saw, Caleb kept it all inside. Ray tried to make things easier in his own way. Every so often, he'd leave out an extra sandwich or a new pair of gloves by Caleb's door. He made a point of including Caleb in morning rounds, explaining tasks in short sentences. Once, he handed Caleb a battered book on horse behavior, no questions asked. Caleb devoured it silently, finding in its pages a language of movement, posture, and trust that seemed to say more than words ever could. Still, the scars, inside and out, remained. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the barn walls gold, Caleb heard the shrill whinny of a horse in pain. He dropped his pitchfork and ran, heart hammering, to the paddocks. Ash was rearing in his pen, a trickle of blood on his flank from a cut he'd opened on the gate. No one dared approach. The ranch hands watched, hands on hips, muttering about calling the vet, maybe even putting the stallion down before he hurt himself, or someone else. Caleb stood at the fence, eyes locked on Ash. In that wild gaze, he saw his own pain reflected, a creature fighting against the world, trusting no one, certain that everyone would only bring more hurt. He wondered if Ash had ever been loved, if he'd ever known anything but fear and anger. That night, after chores, Caleb sat in the hayloft, legs dangling over the edge, the smell of straw and horses comforting in its familiarity. He found himself tracing the rough scar on his forearm, a souvenir from the fire. He closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. Ellie's laugh, the warmth of their old home, the terrible roar of flames. He didn't cry. He couldn't. His grief was too old, too heavy for tears. As the stars blinked awake in the endless Nevada sky, Caleb realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. Every horse at Red Rock carried its own scars, some visible, some buried deep. Some were wary, some bitter, some gentle, but all of them were survivors. And in that silent company, Caleb felt the faintest flicker of belonging. Still, when he dreamed, it was always of fire and smoke, of a voice calling his name from the darkness. Always, he woke in silence. Days turned into weeks. Caleb learned the rhythm of the ranch, the personalities of the horses, the subtle moods of Uncle Ray. The silence between them became a kind of understanding. Ray never pushed, never asked why. He just gave Caleb work, trust, and the space to find his way, if he ever wanted to. One morning, as Caleb walked the fence line, Mira nuzzled his pocket for a treat. He offered her an apple slice, smiling a little. Over in the distance, Ash watched, ears forward, head high. There was challenge in his gaze, but something else, too. A question. Maybe, Caleb thought, the world hadn't ended the night of the fire. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live in it again. But first, he'd have to learn to trust himself, others, and the wild, hurting creatures who carried scars just like his own. The wind picked up, rattling the gates, sending a tumbleweed skittering across the yard. Caleb stuffed his hands in his pockets and turned back toward the barn, feeling, for the first time in a long while, the tiniest spark of hope flicker inside him. Somewhere behind him, Ash stamped and snorted, restless as ever. They were both broken, but maybe, here at Red Rock Ranch, that didn't have to mean hopeless. It was the kind of morning that started out chilly, the kind where mist still clung to the paddocks and the barn doors creaked with a tired sigh when Caleb opened them. The sun barely peered over the sagebrush hills, and the only sounds were the steady munch of horses eating and the occasional flap of a crow's wing overhead. Caleb slipped inside the old barn, pulling his hoodie tighter against the cool air. He liked these early hours, when the world was soft and quiet, and no one expected anything from him except to show up and do the work. He moved down the line of stalls, offering each horse a wordless greeting, a hand on a wither, a gentle pat, a fresh scoop of oats. Mira nickered softly, nosing his hand for more treats, while the younger mustangs watched from their pens, still wary but slowly warming up. As he carried a bale of straw into the feed room, his boot scuffed something buried under a loose floorboard. He paused, setting the bale aside, curiosity stirring. Kneeling down, Caleb pried at the board until it came loose, revealing a dust-covered, leather-bound notebook tucked away in the shadows. He reached in, fingers brushing against brittle pages and the faint scent of old hay and lavender. He pulled the notebook free, squinting at the faded name written in looping, slanted letters across the inside cover. Margaret Wilkins, Red Rock Ranch. Aunt Maggie, the horse whisperer, the woman in the old photograph on his wall, the one everyone talked about with reverence and a touch of sadness, as if her absence was a wound that still hadn't quite healed. Caleb sat cross-legged in the hay, sunlight streaking through cracks in the boards, and opened the notebook. The pages were crammed with careful sketches of horses, rearing, grazing, running wild across open plains. There were notes scrawled in blue ink, diagrams showing how to approach a wary mustang, detailed drawings of eyes and ears and posture, with arrows and words like, "Watch for tension here," and "Approach slowly, no sudden movements." But what struck Caleb most was a section titled, "Silent Bonding." Maggie's notes described how sometimes the most frightened horses responded not to words or commands, but to quiet. How the presence of a calm, patient human could say more than any shout or gentle coaxing. Let them come to you. Share your stillness. Trust is earned, never forced. She'd written it twice, underlined and circled. Caleb's hands trembled a little as he read. Maggie's voice echoed in his head, soothing, patient, unwavering. In the margins, she'd sketched a dark horse with wild eyes, not unlike Ash. She'd written, "Some wounds only heal in silence. Some horses need time to remember they're safe." For the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something shift inside him. He ran a thumb over the drawings, studying how Maggie had broken down every gesture, every signal, a subtle lean, the way to hold your hands, how to breathe slow and steady. It was a language he'd already begun to learn, living at Red Rock, watching the horses and feeling his own pain mirrored in their wary glances. He closed the notebook and tucked it under his arm, looking around the quiet barn. In the distance, Ash's pen stood apart from the others, the stallion restless, pacing the perimeter as always. Caleb stood, dusted off his jeans, and slipped out the back door, notebook clutched tightly. He waited until the ranch hands were busy elsewhere, loading hay or repairing fences, before making his way to Ash's pen. The black Mustang paused, head high, muscles bunched beneath his shiny coat. His dark eyes followed Caleb's every move, suspicious and unblinking. Caleb didn't bring treats or ropes or any tools, just the notebook and what he hoped was enough courage to try something different. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet from the fence. Instead of calling out or making any noise, Caleb sat down cross-legged on the cool earth, facing the pen but not staring directly at Ash. He opened the notebook to a sketch of Maggie sitting quietly by a fence and mirrored her pose exactly. Minutes ticked by. At first, Ash kept his distance, tossing his head and stamping a hoof. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed slow and deep the way the notebook suggested. The ranch faded away, the chatter of the hands, the creak of the barn, even the buzz of flies around the water trough. There was just Caleb, his steady breath, and Ash, a great storm of a horse, all energy and distrust. Ash tossed his mane, snorted, and circled the pen. Caleb felt the stallion's gaze burning into him, searching for a threat, for a sign of weakness. Caleb stayed exactly as he was, letting the silence stretch. At one point, Ash charged the gate with a burst of energy, sending the metal rattling, but Caleb didn't flinch. He remembered Maggie's note. Fear is a conversation. Calm is an answer. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ash's movements changed. The wild energy faded, replaced by a wary curiosity. He stopped at the far end of the pen, watching. Caleb breathed, slow and even, shoulders relaxed. He kept his hands open and visible on his knees, copying every detail from Maggie's sketches. After what felt like an eternity, Ash took a step toward the fence, then another. His ears flicked forward, his nostrils widening as he sniffed the air. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move, didn't even blink. Then, astonishingly, Ash lowered his head. Just a little, a sign of submission, or at least a willingness to listen. Caleb's breath caught in his throat, but he held steady, fighting the urge to reach out or call to the horse. In the ranch house window, Uncle Ray watched, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. He saw the silent boy and the wild stallion locked in a wordless standoff, and something like hope flickered in his eyes. He didn't call out, didn't interrupt. He just watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Minutes passed. Ash closed the distance to the fence, nostrils quivering, eyes fixed on Caleb. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that Caleb could smell the grassy sweetness of his breath, see the old scars running along his neck and shoulder. Very slowly, Caleb looked down at the notebook in his lap, then back up at Ash. The stallion didn't spook. He just watched, chest heaving with every breath. Caleb wondered if Ash remembered Maggie, if the gentle energy in this spot felt familiar somehow, a ghost of kindness lingering in the dust. Finally, Ash let out a long, shuddering sigh and turned away, moving back toward the far side of the pen. Caleb stayed where he was, letting the moments settle like dust after a stampede. He didn't know what would happen next. He just knew that, for the first time, Ash hadn't seen him as a threat. Something had shifted, a tiny step toward trust, built not on words or force, but on silence and patience. That night, Caleb lay awake with the notebook beside him, reading every page by the glow of a flashlight. He traced Maggie's sketches, practiced the breathing techniques, memorized every phrase about listening and patience. He was determined to try again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, no matter how long it took. As sleep finally claimed him, Caleb dreamed, not of fire, but of a black stallion standing quietly at the fence, watching him with dark, curious eyes. It was enough to give him hope, just enough to try again. Dawn broke with a thin wash of gold spilling over the low Nevada hills. Caleb was already awake, boots on, hoodie zipped tight, notebook tucked beneath his arm as he made his way out to Ash's pen. The world felt softer before the ranch fully woke. Just the sound of distant coyotes, the hum of power lines, the muffled rustle of horses shifting in their stalls. Today, Caleb was determined to push a little further. He settled by the fence, just as Maggie's journal had shown, legs crossed, hands relaxed, shoulders loose. He slowed his breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, letting his tension melt into the chilly earth. Ash was already pacing, nervous, wary, still trapped in a prison of memory and instinct. Caleb watched the big Mustang's muscles ripple beneath his black coat, every movement loaded with old fear. Minutes passed in silence. Then Ash stilled, ears swiveling as if tuning in to the unfamiliar calm radiating from the boy at the fence. For several mornings now, Caleb had done the same thing, showing up, sitting, offering nothing but stillness. Sometimes Ash would snort or paw at the dirt. Sometimes he'd simply ignore him. But something had changed since the first day Caleb found the notebook. Each morning, Ash grew a little less agitated. His circles grew smaller, his eyes more curious. This morning, Ash stepped closer. Not much, just a few tentative paces. Caleb kept his gaze soft, never locking eyes, just as Maggie's notes said. Horses were prey animals. Direct stares could feel like a challenge. Instead, he watched Ash's legs, the twitch of his tail, the flicker of an ear. He waited. Another step. Caleb could hear the ranch waking up now. The buzz of the coffee pot in the kitchen, the distant laughter of a ranch hand greeting a neighbor, the clang of a metal gate as Uncle Ray checked on the other horses. Still, the moment between Caleb and Ash was a pocket of peace in the chaos. Ash lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air near Caleb. The boy held his breath, fighting the urge to reach out. He could feel his own heart thundering, but on the outside, he was a statue. Calm as an answer, Maggie had written. He clung to it like a lifeline. Suddenly, Ash let out a deep, uncertain sigh. His ears flicked forward. He took one last step, then stopped, close enough for Caleb to see every scar and fleck of dust on his shiny coat. For a brief second, Ash's nose almost brushed the notebook lying in the dirt. Caleb dared not move. From the porch, Uncle Ray watched the unlikely scene. His silent nephew and the wildest mustang on the ranch, breathing the same air, holding the same tension in their bodies. He blinked. Hard. Even he, a man not given to miracles, knew something rare was happening. Ray turned to grab his phone, then thought better of it. This wasn't something you recorded. This was something you bore witness to, hoping it wouldn't vanish the moment you tried to capture it. Back at the fence, Caleb waited as Ash considered him with wary, searching eyes. The stallion huffed and tossed his head, then, just as quickly as he'd come, stepped back, putting distance between them. But he didn't bolt, didn't rear, or threaten. He simply stood and watched. Caleb exhaled, a shaky breath of relief and wonder. He knew he'd crossed some invisible threshold. He stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his jeans, and retreated the same way he'd come. No sudden moves, no show of dominance, just quiet respect. That afternoon, Uncle Ray cornered him by the tack room, wiping grease from his hands. He's never done that before, Ray said quietly, glancing toward Ash's pen. You know that, right? Caleb nodded, clutching the notebook. He could see pride in Ray's eyes, mixed with amazement and maybe a flicker of hope. I don't know what you're doing out there, kid, Ray said, but whatever it is, keep at it. Caleb offered a rare, fleeting smile. That small exchange meant more than words could say. Word of Ash's change began to trickle through town. It started with the ranch hands, who noticed the stallion's calmer demeanor, the way he didn't try to bite or bolt when Caleb was near. Someone mentioned it to a neighbor at the feed store, who told their cousin, who told a reporter for the small-town weekly paper. Before long, people started dropping by Red Rock Ranch to see for themselves. The silent boy and the savage mustang. Some were curious, some skeptical. A few locals whispered that it was just a matter of time before Ash went wild again and hurt someone. But others, especially the kids, watched with wide eyes as Caleb sat by the pen day after day, slowly earning the black stallion's trust. One afternoon, a group of school children arrived on a field trip. Their teacher, Mrs. Thornton, spoke softly to Ray, while the kids pressed up against the rails, eyes wide with excitement and fear. Is it true he doesn't talk? One little boy asked, watching Caleb as he knelt by the fence, scribbling notes in the battered journal. He talks, Ray said quietly, just not the way you're used to. A hush fell over the group as Ash approached Caleb again, this time even closer. Caleb lifted his hand, palm open, letting the stallion sniff his fingers. There was no sudden magic, no dramatic transformation. But in the simple, silent moment, trust grew a little more. "Look, Mom!" a girl shouted. "He's not scared anymore." Not scared, not yet tamed, but perhaps willing at last to listen. That evening, as the sun set and painted the ranch in brilliant shades of red and gold, Caleb returned to Ash's pen for one last visit. The stallion came to him almost at once. Caleb knelt, head bowed, and Ash reached over the fence, touching his forehead gently to the boy's hair. Caleb closed his eyes, a shiver running down his spine. They stayed that way for a long moment, boy and horse, both scarred by the past, both learning to believe in something new. Back in the house, Ray called his sister, the first time he'd spoken to Caleb's mother in months. "He's making progress," Ray said softly. "You'd be proud." By the end of that week, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard the story. Some doubted, some scoffed, but many began to root for the silent boy and the wild horse. Even the most hardened skeptics found themselves watching for updates, peering over the ranch fence when they drove by. And through it all, Caleb kept showing up, notebook in hand, patience and silence his only tools. Each day, Ash came a little closer. Each day, Caleb's hope grew a little stronger. Maybe, he thought, healing didn't require words. Maybe all it needed was time, trust, and the courage to show up again and again, until the impossible started to feel like a new beginning. Not everyone in Red Rock was rooting for a miracle. As word spread about the strange connection forming between Caleb and the wild black Mustang, so did unease. And nowhere did it run deeper than in the corner office of Linda Prescott, president of Prescott Holdings and unofficial queen of the town's growing business elite. Linda's house sat on the hill just past the old church, all glass, steel, and sharp angles. She liked to look out over the valley and imagine a luxury spa where the Red Rock Ranch now stood, the dusty corrals replaced by manicured lawns and infinity pools. She'd made more than a few offers to Uncle Ray over the years, but he'd never so much as considered them. "The ranch is for the horses, not for sale," Ray would say, closing the door in her face. This morning, Linda stood by her kitchen window, coffee steaming in her hand, listening as her assistant, Gail, read out the latest gossip. Apparently, the wild Mustang, Ash, they call him, is getting tamer. The boy, Caleb, hasn't said a word in a year, but now he's spending all day at the fence. Some people say it's a miracle, but I think they're just getting careless out there. Linda narrowed her eyes. She'd seen Ash with her own eyes, twice as big as any horse she'd ever ridden, meaner than any animal should be, and a liability as far as she was concerned. In her mind, the more miracles people talked about, the harder it would be to convince the town that the ranch was a danger. That week, Linda made her move. She showed up at the Red Rock Ranch gate in her silver SUV, dressed in spotless riding boots and a crisp suit, clipboard in hand. "Ray," she called, her voice sugary sweet. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ray met her at the gate, arms crossed. "If it's about buying the place again..." "You're wasting your breath, Linda." She smiled tightly. "It's about safety, Ray, and the welfare of that boy you've got out here. There's a lot of concern in the community. Ash is violent. Everyone's seen him rear and kick. He could hurt someone, maybe even kill. And Caleb..." She glanced pointedly toward the barn where Caleb was helping sweep the aisle. "Well, you know people are talking. They say he's not right since the fire. That maybe it's not safe for him to be around animals like that." Ray's jaw tightened. "He's got more sense than half the men in this county, Linda." But she was already pulling out papers from her clipboard. "I'm filing a motion with the town council. I want Ash removed from the property. Animal control agrees. He's a danger. And as for Caleb, I've already called social services. If you can't guarantee his safety, maybe he'd be better off somewhere else. Somewhere more stable." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the dry leaves in the cottonwood trees. Then Ray spoke, voice low and hard. "You know you're not fooling anyone, Linda. You want the ranch gone. You'll say anything to make that happen." Linda smiled, folding her hands. "I want what's best for everyone Ray. I hope you'll see that before it's too late. She left in a cloud of dust, her threat hanging heavy in the air. Ray didn't tell Caleb about the visit at first, but by the next day, the story had spread all over town. Linda's accusations, her petition to remove Ash, the rumors that Caleb was unstable or disturbed. The phone rang all afternoon. Neighbors called to ask what was going on. Some offered support, but others weren't so sure. Down at the feed store, talk turned dark. "Did you see that stallion last year?" one rancher said. "He almost went through the fence when the fire engines rolled by. You can't trust a horse like that. He'll snap and trample someone." "Kid hasn't said a word since his sister died," someone else whispered. "My wife says he's not all there. Maybe the ranch isn't the place for him." At school, the story reached the other teens. Caleb had tried returning for a few classes, but mostly kept to himself. Now, even more eyes followed him in the halls, some curious, some frightened, some openly mocking. "Hey, Caleb, heard you talk to horses now?" A boy jeered from across the cafeteria, making neighing noises. Caleb ignored him, head down, but the sting cut deep. Ray noticed the change. The hands on the ranch grew more tense, more careful. Even Mira, the gentle mare, seemed to sense the anxiety in the air. Ash grew restless again, pacing his pen, picking up on the stress around him. Late one night, after most of the ranch had gone quiet, Ray found Caleb sitting alone in the hayloft, legs dangling over the edge. The boy clutched Maggie's old notebook tight, staring at nothing. Ray climbed the ladder, settling beside him in the dark. For a long while, neither said a word. Finally, Ray spoke. "You know, there's always folks who want to tear down what they don't understand. They see something wild, something they can't control, and they try to get rid of it. Doesn't matter if it's a horse, a ranch, or a kid who's hurting." Caleb looked up, his eyes shining in the thin moonlight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Ray put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll fight this, you hear? They're not taking you, and they're not taking Ash. Not if I have anything to say about it." That promise was enough to get Caleb through the next day, and the one after. But the tension only grew as Linda's motion wound its way to the town council. News spread that there'd be a public hearing. Anyone could show up and speak their piece. Some ranchers lined up behind Ray, others behind Linda, and most tried to avoid picking sides. Animal control showed up to document Ash's behavior. The Mustang put on a show, rearing, bucking, kicking at the fence. One officer took shaky cell phone footage that made Ash look even more dangerous than he was. Caleb watched it all with a sinking heart. The closer the hearing came, the more the community divided. Strangers he'd never met now eyed him and Ray with suspicion or whispered as they passed. The ranch felt less like a haven and more like a fortress under siege. Still, every morning, Caleb returned to Ash's pen. He kept to the routine: silent presence, slow breathing, careful movements. Each day, Ash met him at the fence. Each day, trust grew, bit by fragile bit. But as the date of the town hearing loomed, Caleb couldn't shake the dread curling in his gut. He'd already lost so much: his sister, his voice, his old life. Now it felt like he might lose everything all over again. He made a promise to himself that night, scribbling it in the margin of Maggie's notebook. "I won't let them take you. I'll fight for you, even if I can't speak." The sky outside was bruised purple, the wind howling through the lonely valley. In the distance, Ash tossed his head and whinnied at the moon, a wild sound that seemed to echo Caleb's own fear and his stubborn hope. Whatever happened next, Caleb knew this. He wasn't running anymore. Not from Ash, not from the town, not from his scars. And maybe, just maybe, that courage would be enough to change everything. By the time the day of the hearing arrived, Red Rock felt like a town on edge. The main street was busier than it had been in months. Trucks and cars parked bumper to bumper outside the community center. Neighbors who'd barely spoken in years found themselves swapping rumors in the aisles of the grocery store or debating the future of Red Rock Ranch at the diner. Old friendships strained, new alliances formed over coffee or cautious nods. Caleb felt the tension in his bones. He woke up before dawn, sitting on the edge of his bed with Maggie's journal pressed to his chest, the words and sketches now worn soft from weeks of rereading. Downstairs, Ray moved quietly through the kitchen, pouring coffee, glancing at the old clock on the wall. "You ready, kid?" he asked gently, knowing full well there was no easy answer. Caleb nodded, swallowing hard, his throat tight. He wasn't sure how anyone could ever be ready for a day like this. By 9, the community center was packed. The meeting room, usually reserved for holiday potlucks and 4-H fairs, was standing room only. Ranchers, teachers, parents, retirees, even a few teenagers had squeezed into the folding chairs. Near the front, a group of animal control officers set up a laptop and a projector. Reporters from the county newspaper and a couple of bloggers with cameras clustered near the windows. Linda Prescott stood at the front, all polished confidence, her blonde hair perfect, her suit immaculate, her clipboard stacked with neatly organized papers. She smiled, shook hands, and made sure to speak to anyone with a title or a vote. Behind her sat Gail, her assistant, ready to hand over any document or bit of gossip needed. Uncle Ray and Caleb sat together in the third row, Ray's arms slung protectively around the back of Caleb's chair. Caleb stared at the floor, notebook gripped tight in his hands, feeling the weight of so many eyes on him. The mayor, a gray-haired man with deep laugh lines and tired eyes, banged his gavel at 10 sharp. "Let's bring this meeting to order, folks." Linda was the first to speak, her voice smooth and practiced. "Thank you, Mayor Gordon, council members, neighbors. I stand here today out of concern for the safety of our community. The facts are clear. Red Rock Ranch is housing a dangerous animal, a wild mustang named Ash, known for violent behavior. I have here footage taken by animal control showing Ash rearing, kicking, and behaving aggressively." She clicked a remote, and the projector flashed onto a white sheet tacked to the wall. The video was grainy, shaky. Ash lashing out at the fence, nostrils flared, hooves pounding the earth. There was no context, no hint that the footage was shot just after a thunderstorm, when Ash had been startled by a car horn. No one mentioned that the same horse, just hours later, had stood quietly at the fence with Caleb sitting nearby. A murmur rippled through the room as the video played. Some people frowned, others looked worried. A few teenagers snickered in the back, passing their phones back and forth. Linda continued, "Now, I know many of you have a fondness for Ray and his ranch, but ask yourselves, what if that horse got loose? What if a child wandered too close? And what of young Mr. Mason here?" She turned, her gaze zeroing in on Caleb. A boy traumatized by tragedy, now placed in the care of someone who allows him daily contact with a violent animal. This is not safe. It is not responsible. And it is not in the best interest of our town. Ray's hands curled into fists, but he held his tongue. Caleb kept his head down, his face burning with shame and fury. The mayor cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Prescott. Does anyone else wish to speak?" Ray stood, his voice steady but rough with emotion. "Most of you know me. I've been running that ranch since before most of you had gray hair. I've taken in horses no one else would touch. Some said Ash was a lost cause, but I've watched something change in him. Because of Caleb. That boy hasn't said a word since the fire that took his sister. He's found a way to reach that horse no one else could. Isn't that worth something?" A rancher near the back piped up. "I've seen that boy sit for hours, not moving, not scaring the animals. Maybe there's something to what Ray's saying." But Linda shook her head. "Emotional appeals don't change facts. Ash is a danger, and so long as he's on the ranch, the community is at risk." The mayor turned to Caleb. "Would you like to speak, son?" Every face in the room turned toward him, hundreds of eyes, all expectation and judgment. Caleb's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to speak, to defend Ash, to explain what the silent connection meant, but his throat locked up. The memories of fire, smoke, Ellie's hand slipping away, and a year of silence crashed over him like a wave. He stood slowly, hands shaking, notebook clutched to his chest. He opened his mouth, tried to form the words he'd rehearsed in the barn the night before. Nothing came out. The silence grew heavy, uncomfortable. Someone coughed. A woman whispered, "Poor boy, can't even speak for himself." Ray reached out, resting a hand on Caleb's shoulder, a simple gesture that said, "You don't have to do this alone." Caleb stared at the faces, some kind, some skeptical, some afraid. His voice wouldn't come. All he could do was pull out Maggie's notebook, open to a page with her careful sketches of silent bonding, and hold it up for the room to see. Horses, people, trust, drawn in simple lines that spoke more than any words he could find. The mayor looked at Ray, sympathy in his eyes. "Thank you, Caleb. That's all right." Linda stepped in quickly, her voice softer now, but no less dangerous. "I'm sure we all feel for young Mr. Mason, but we can't let sentiment cloud our judgment. We must protect our community. I urge you to vote in favor of removing Ash and placing Caleb in proper care." The meeting dragged on. Supporters of the ranch argued for its value to the community, how it provided jobs, gave horses a second chance, brought tourists. Others, nervous or swayed by Linda's video, insisted that safety had to come first. Outside, the sun was hot and unrelenting. Inside, the tension grew thicker by the minute. Finally, the mayor called for a break. Ray and Caleb stepped into the hallway, where the buzz of conversation was a wall of noise. Ray knelt beside Caleb. "You did good, kid. I know how hard that was. We're not giving up." Caleb nodded, wiping at his eyes. For the first time, he wished desperately that he could speak, that he could make people understand what Ash really was, what the ranch meant, what it felt like to be judged by your silence. The hearing resumed, the arguments looping in circles, risk, reward, history, heartache. When the council finally adjourned, they promised a decision by the end of the week. As the crowd spilled out onto the steps, Linda smiled and shook hands, her work done. Ray and Caleb walked home together, shoulders heavy, the future of Red Rock Ranch, of Ash, of everything they'd rebuilt, hanging in the balance. That evening, as dusk crept over the valley, Caleb sat by Ash's pen. The stallion approached, as if sensing the storm in the boy's heart. Caleb pressed his forehead to Ash's warm neck, letting the silence say everything words could not. Whatever the town decided, Caleb knew one thing. He'd found his voice. Not in speech, but in the trust he'd built, one silent day at a time. The week after the hearing crawled by under a shadow of uncertainty. Each sunrise brought new whispers, more sideways glances, and the gnawing dread that the council's decision might mean the end for Ash, and for Caleb's fragile new world at Red Rock Ranch. Ray did his best to keep the mood steady, barking orders with a little more edge than usual, but everyone could feel the tension, horses and people alike. One evening, as the air grew heavy and electric with the promise of an early summer storm, Caleb took his familiar seat by Ash's pen. He'd started bringing Maggie's notebook with him, sketching Ash or jotting down small observations, anything to keep the worries at bay. The black stallion had grown calmer, even expectant. Meeting Caleb at the fence, nostrils quivering as if he could sense something shifting between them. Thunder rumbled on the horizon, but the real storm was waiting in the shadows. It started with a flicker of movement near the old storage shed behind the barn. Caleb, lost in thought, almost missed it. A muffled laugh, the scrape of shoes on gravel. He glanced up to see two teenage boys, faces half hidden under the brims of their caps, ducked behind the tool shed, glancing back at the paddocks with a mix of mischief and nervousness. Then, the sharp hiss of a fuse. Suddenly, a string of fireworks burst into wildlife, shrieking and crackling in the night. Red and green sparks screamed over the paddocks, exploding against the dark like war. Horses panicked, Ash most of all. He reared, slamming his massive body into the gate, eyes rolling white with terror. The ranch erupted into chaos, hooves pounding, frantic neighs echoing across the yard, dogs barking from the house. Caleb jumped to his feet, heart hammering. He shouted, no sound came out, but his body was already moving. The boys darted away, one dropping a pack of unused fireworks in his rush to escape. But Caleb had no time to chase them. The storage shed had caught a stray spark and was now smoldering, thin ribbons of smoke snaking up into the darkening sky. He sprinted toward the shed, flinging open the door, frantically searching for the fire extinguisher. But the smoke billowed thick and fast, stinging his eyes and burning his throat. He could barely see. Somewhere behind him, the horses thrashed in their pens, and Ash's shrill scream split the night. A beam overhead cracked. Flames crawled along the old wood, hungry and bright. Caleb coughed, stumbling as the heat pressed in on all sides. He grabbed for the handle, but the smoke grew heavier, thicker, memories flooding his mind in dizzying flashes. Fire, Ellie's hand, the helpless terror of being trapped. Panic nearly froze him, but then, amid the chaos, he heard Ash. The Mustang had broken through the gate, galvanized by terror and the memory of old pain. He barreled toward the shed, hooves tearing up the ground, mane wild as a storm cloud. Caleb dropped to his knees, dizzy, vision tunneling. The air burned his lungs. The world shrank to the roar of flames and the thundering approach of the stallion. Ash charged straight at the door, shattering it with a blow of his shoulder. Splinters flew, smoke and sparks swirling. Caleb barely registered the massive black head shoving against him, felt strong teeth grab the back of his hoodie, tugging, pulling. Ash snorted, eyes wide with fear and fury, but he didn't back down. Caleb, half dragged, half stumbling, let Ash pull him clear of the burning shed. Outside, cool air hit his face, and he collapsed in a fit of coughing. Ray and the ranch hands raced over, extinguishers in hand, shouting orders and spraying foam at the blaze. Someone called 911, sirens wailed in the distance. In the chaos, a neighbor, a man named Hank, there to drop off feed, tripped and fell hard, twisting his ankle. He looked up, disoriented, as Ash galloped by. Hank's face twisted in pain and panic, and in the confusion, he started shouting, "That horse is out of control! He nearly killed me! He went straight for me!" Other witnesses gathered, drawn by the commotion and the swirling lights of arriving emergency vehicles. Some filmed on their phones, others tried to help. Linda Prescott arrived in her SUV, lips pressed thin as she surveyed the damage. "That horse is a menace," Hank shouted, clutching his leg, pain and fear in his voice. "He busted out and attacked me. Somebody's got to do something." Linda seized the moment, pulling her phone to call animal control again, her voice ringing clear over the crackling embers and anxious crowd. "This is exactly what I warned the council about. That animal is dangerous." But amid the accusations and the panic, Caleb knelt beside Ash, his hands buried in the horse's tangled mane. The Mustang was trembling, flanks heaving, coat flecked with sweat and soot, but his eyes sought Caleb's, wild but steady. Ray crouched next to his nephew, face tight with worry. "You all right, son?" Caleb nodded, still coughing, tears streaming down his smoke-stained face, not just from the pain, but from relief and awe. He touched Ash's neck, feeling the horse's shuddering breaths and the raw strength that had just saved his life. The fire was soon brought under control, but the aftermath was chaos. Firemen hosing down the remains of the shed, officers taking statements, neighbors milling about with worried faces. Hank, bandaged and bitter, stuck to his story, blaming Ash for his fall, insisting the horse was a ticking time bomb. Linda prowled the scene, gathering support for her crusade to have Ash removed. "This could have been so much worse," she said to anyone who would listen. "A child could have died tonight." But the ranch hands and some neighbors saw things differently. "That horse got Caleb out of there," one said quietly. "I saw it with my own eyes. He pulled the boy clear." Another nodded. "I never saw a horse do anything like that." As the crowd thinned and the blue and red lights faded, Ray walked Caleb and Ash back to the safety of the paddock. "You saved each other tonight," he said quietly. "I don't care what anyone else says. I saw it." Caleb hugged Ash's neck, his arms tight around the animal that had risked everything for him. In that moment, he found himself wishing, just for a second, that he could speak, that he could tell the world what Ash had done. But in the hush that followed the chaos, action spoke louder than any words. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Caleb sat by Ash's pen under the clear, star-strewn sky. The Mustang stood close, warm and solid, his breathing slow and calm at last. Caleb leaned his head against Ash's powerful shoulder, and in the silence, he understood. They had both survived the fire, both come through terror to find trust. Whatever the world said, they belonged together. But as he closed his eyes, a new worry crept in, the certainty that Linda would use tonight against them, twisting the truth, turning the town's fear into a weapon. Tomorrow would bring more battles, but tonight, under the watchful stars, Caleb let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would find its way out. In the days after the fire, Red Rock Ranch felt haunted. The shed stood blackened and half collapsed, the scent of burnt wood still sharp in the air. Word about the incident raced through town faster than the flames ever had. People took sides, some blaming Caleb and Ash, others quietly pointing out that no one had seen who started the fireworks. But facts didn't matter as much as fear. Animal Control arrived the morning after the fire with a police escort, their van bright and clinical against the battered backdrop of the ranch. They moved with the cold efficiency of people used to making hard decisions. Ray argued, but the law was clear. After an incident involving injury and property damage, the animal in question had to be quarantined. Ash, who'd spent his life fighting cages and confinement, was herded, reluctant and furious, into a temporary pen at the far edge of the property, away from the other horses, away from Caleb. Caleb watched in silent agony as they led Ash away, the Mustang's eyes wide, nostrils flared, tossing his head as if he couldn't believe this was happening again. Caleb wanted to scream, to fight, to beg them to stop, but the words stayed trapped inside, sharp as glass in his throat. He stood rooted to the spot, fists clenched, Maggie's notebook pressed so hard to his chest that the leather left creases in his palm. Linda Prescott didn't waste time. She showed up in heels and sunglasses, snapping photos, speaking to the animal control officers in low, urgent tones. She made sure the local reporter caught her looking grim and concerned for public safety. By noon, she'd emailed her statement to every news outlet within 50 miles. This is exactly the kind of danger I warned the council about. We must put safety first, even if it means making difficult decisions. That night, Ray found Caleb in the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring into the empty stall where Ash used to sleep. The barn felt hollow, every creak and whisper magnified by the missing presence of the stallion. Ray crouched down, rubbing the back of his neck. I know it looks bad, kid, but we'll fight this. There's got to be proof somewhere, something to show what really happened. Caleb didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. He pulled Maggie's notebook from his pocket, flipping to a page she'd labeled, "Truth Finds a Way." The drawing showed a horse and boy, side by side, their shadows merging into one. Ray tried to keep his promise. He called every witness, talked to every neighbor, but the stories conflicted. Some swore Ash had charged Hank. Others remembered only the chaos and smoke. Even those who'd seen Ash pull Caleb out of the shed found their memories doubted, dismissed as hysteria or wishful thinking. Frustrated, Ray spent hours digging through old boxes in the tack room, looking for anything, papers, photos, maybe a letter from Maggie. At the bottom of a crate, under moldy show ribbons and a cracked cowboy hat, he found something he'd forgotten. A trail camera, battered and half dead, that he'd once set up along the ranch's north fence line. It had been there for years, meant to catch coyotes or stray cattle, but he'd never gotten around to retrieving the footage. He brought the camera inside, cleaned the grime from the plastic, and fumbled with the memory card until it finally clicked into his old laptop. Most of the files were useless, grainy shots of jackrabbits and nighttime storms, the odd raccoon, but as Ray scrolled further, he found a series of videos dated the night of the fire that destroyed Caleb's home. He sat up straighter, pulse racing. One video showed a blur of light, flames licking at the edge of the ranch property, far off in the darkness. But then, a black shape burst through the fence, racing toward the house. Ray leaned closer, squinting at the pixelated footage. It was Ash, Years younger, but unmistakable, his wild mane flying as he galloped toward the burning building. Ray skipped ahead. The next video showed Ash rearing at the back door, kicking furiously until the frame splintered. Then, a small figure, Caleb, stumbled out, soot-covered and half-collapsed, clutching the Mustang's mane as Ash led him away from the flames. Ray stared in disbelief. He replayed the footage again and again, unable to believe his luck or the story it told. Ash hadn't just saved Caleb from the fire at the ranch. He'd saved him during the house fire, all those years ago. The Mustang had remembered the boy before the boy remembered him. Ray raced out to find Caleb, who was still sitting by the quarantine pen, one hand resting on the fence as close as he was allowed to get. Ash paced inside, agitated and anxious, pressing his nose to Caleb's palm when he could. The boy looked lost, as if a piece of himself was locked up with the horse. "Caleb," Ray called, out of breath, waving the laptop. "You gotta see this, kid." Caleb watched the footage in stunned silence. For a moment he couldn't breathe. There was Ash, fierce and wild, risking everything to break through flames and smoke. There was himself, smaller, terrified, finding his way out of hell by holding onto a mane thick with ash and soot. He remembered nothing of that moment, only flashes of fire and the aching emptiness after. But seeing it now, something shifted inside him, a realization that went deeper than words. He looked up at Ash, who stood at the edge of the pen, watching, waiting. The stallion's eyes met his, dark and familiar. Caleb pressed his hand to the glass, as if he could reach through and touch the memory itself. Ray's voice was thick with emotion. "He saved you before, kid. He remembered you first. That horse ain't just wild. He's family." A spark of hope flickered in Caleb's chest, small but steady. Maybe, with this proof, they could save Ash, show the town that what bound them together was more than luck or training. It was trust, forged in the heat of disaster, strong enough to survive anything. That night, for the first time in weeks, Caleb slept without nightmares. When he woke, he was ready to fight for Ash, not just with silence, but with truth. The next morning, the whole town buzzed with rumors, videos, accusations, and the lingering question of what really happened the night of the fire. Ray called the mayor first thing, barely letting the old man finish his coffee. "You need to see something with your own eyes," Ray insisted. "Not gossip, not hearsay. Proof." By mid-morning, the community center was open again, the air tense with expectation. Linda Prescott was there early, her hair immaculate, her lips pressed into a confident line. She'd already convinced herself that nothing could challenge her crusade against Red Rock Ranch. She chatted with council members, even offered to buy coffee for the animal control officers, never missing a chance to remind them all of the danger lurking on Ray's property. But Ray wasn't alone. This time, Caleb walked beside him, Maggie's battered notebook in one hand and Ray's old laptop clutched tight in the other. He looked thinner than ever, but something new burned in his eyes, a stubborn, fragile hope. Inside, the crowd hushed as Ray set up the laptop. "I want everyone to watch this," he said, voice rough but steady. "This is from a trail cam out on the edge of our property. I didn't even remember it was there until last night. What you're about to see is the truth, not just about Ash, but about everything we've been through." The video played. The room watched in rapt silence as the black Mustang, Ash, wild and impossibly brave, charged through the burning fence line on the night of the house fire. They saw the horse batter the door, refusing to leave until a soot-covered boy staggered out and clung to his mane. They saw Ash lead the child through smoke and falling debris, away from death and into the uncertain safety of the desert night. When the screen went black, the silence was absolute. Even Linda seemed stunned, her practiced smile faltering as people turned to look at her, not with admiration, but with suspicion. Ray's voice trembled. "That's what your dangerous animal did. He risked his life to save my nephew." He remembered Caleb even when Caleb couldn't remember himself. Ash isn't a monster. He's a hero. A murmur ran through the crowd. A mother near the front wiped her eyes. One of the ranchers cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Linda quickly recovered, but her voice had lost its edge. We can all be grateful that the horse helped that boy, but that doesn't change what happened last week. Property damage, injury, risk. We can't just, Ray interrupted, for once not caring about politeness. You want to talk about risk? Let's talk about what really happened. He turned to the mayor and council, his gaze steely. I've got witnesses who say they saw 2 teens near the shed lighting fireworks. Funny thing, those boys happen to be the sons of some of your biggest donors, Linda, and there's more. He nodded to Caleb, who opened Maggie's notebook and pulled out a folded piece of paper, an anonymous letter someone had slipped under the barn door that morning. Ray read it aloud. Mrs. Prescott paid us $50 to cause trouble around the ranch. She said all we had to do was scare the horses, but it got out of hand. We didn't mean for the fire to spread. The room erupted. Gasps, angry whispers, shouts, years of small-town secrets boiling over in an instant. Linda went pale. That's a lie. Anyone could have written that. This is just a distraction. But the mayor held up his hand. We'll be the judge of that, Mrs. Prescott. The evidence is pretty damning, and with that video, well, I think it's time we take a closer look at your motives. Animal control officers huddled together, their expressions changing from doubt to regret. One, a grizzled woman named Officer Daniels, stepped forward. I was there the night of the fire. I saw Ash go in after Caleb. I didn't want to believe a Mustang could be that brave, but I saw it. And now I see I was wrong to doubt him. Someone started to clap, just a few people at first, then more, until the room filled with applause. The tide had turned. Ray put an arm around Caleb's shoulders, pride shining in his eyes. Maybe now we can stop fighting each other and start doing what's right for these animals and for our own kids. Caleb stood frozen as people looked to him. He felt the weight of 100 eyes, of old pain and new possibility. He wanted to speak, but fear gripped him. The words seemed trapped behind a dam built of smoke, grief, and a year of silence. Ray squeezed his arm. You don't have to say anything, son. You've already done more than enough. But Caleb took a shaky breath and looked at Ash, who waited in the doorway with a handler, wild and watchful, but calm. Something in the horse's gaze steadied him, and Caleb remembered Maggie's words. Trust is earned, one quiet step at a time. He stepped forward, heart in his throat. He stared at the crowd, searching for Ellie's spirit in the faces. Then, barely above a whisper, he spoke. He saved me. Twice. Maybe I can help others now. The words hung in the air, soft and halting, but powerful as thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the mayor nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. That's good enough for me, son. The motion to shut down the ranch was dismissed. Linda, exposed and defeated, left the building without another word. The council announced that Red Rock Ranch would stay open, that Ash would return to his home, and that new plans would be made to expand the ranch's work with at-risk youth, just as Caleb had hinted. Afterward, people crowded around Ray and Caleb, shaking hands, offering hugs, asking questions. A few teens, once part of the jeering crowd at school, approached Caleb with shy smiles, suddenly seeing him not as a victim, but as someone brave, someone like them. The footage went viral by nightfall. News crews arrived to film Ash running free again, Caleb by his side, both changed forever by fire and forgiveness. Strangers sent letters, donations, and messages of hope from across the country. As dusk fell, Ray found Caleb out by the corral, stroking Ash's mane. The silence between them was different now, no longer heavy with grief, but humming with new beginnings. You did good, kid, Ray said softly. Caleb smiled, voice still shaky but stronger now. We did, and for the first time in a year, the sound of his own voice felt like home. A new dawn broke over Red Rock Ranch, streaking the Nevada sky with gold and rose, as if the whole world had been scrubbed clean and given another chance. The air buzzed with the energy of beginnings, the low whicker of horses in the paddocks, the laughter of kids spilling from a battered school bus, the measured footsteps of volunteers rolling out wheelbarrows and laying down fresh hay. Where once the ranch had felt haunted by loss and suspicion, it now pulsed with hope. At the center of it all stood Caleb, a little taller, a little steadier, his shadow stretching alongside Ash's as they walked the fence line together. The black Mustang's coat gleamed in the morning light, his eyes softer but still sharp, always alert. There would always be wildness in him, just as there would always be scars in Caleb, but both boy and stallion wore them now as badges, not burdens. Word of their story had spread far beyond the boundaries of Red Rock. After the town hall and the viral video, people from all walks of life reached out. Parents, teachers, therapists, even strangers who'd never seen a Mustang or lost a sibling, but recognized, in their own ways, the ache of being misunderstood. Letters and emails poured in, along with small donations and big dreams. That's how the idea for the new program began. Red Rock Ranch would open its gates as an equine therapy center, a place for at-risk teens, wounded veterans, and anyone haunted by trauma. The town, newly united, rallied behind the effort. Carpenters built new stalls, artists painted murals of wild horses and brave kids. Neighbors who'd once gossiped over coffee now organized fundraisers and bake sales. Even the mayor stopped by every week to check on progress and share stories of his own rough childhood. Caleb still didn't talk much, but his voice, quiet, steady, now carried when it mattered. He worked with Ray and a small team of therapists, leading the first silent bonding sessions. He showed nervous teens how to slow their breathing, how to sit with patience at the edge of a corral, how to let the horses come to them. "You don't need a voice to be heard," he told them, his words shy at first, but growing stronger with each day. "Trust is something you build, not something you demand." Ash became the heart of the program. Where once he'd been a symbol of danger, now he was living proof that healing could grow in even the wildest soul. The first time a new kid, a girl named Riley, fresh from a foster home and silent as a stone, managed to touch Ash's nose, the whole ranch cheered. Ash, usually so guarded, nuzzled her hand, and something in Riley's shoulders relaxed. That small miracle became a ritual. Each new arrival tried, in their own time, to reach Ash, and with each quiet victory, hope took root. The ranch changed in other ways, too. Uncle Ray, once gruff and solitary, became something of a local celebrity, giving interviews and sharing Maggie's notebook with anyone who asked. He spoke of Maggie often now, how her patience, her belief in silent healing, had left a legacy that was finally being honored. "It's not about fixing what's broken," he told a reporter, "but about giving everyone, horse or human, a place to belong." Linda Prescott, shunned and embarrassed, eventually left town for her lake house, her name no longer invoked as a threat, but as a warning. What happens when fear is allowed to drown out compassion? The boys who'd started the fire were sentenced to community service at the ranch, picking stalls and mending fences under Ray's watchful eye. Over time, even they began to understand the gift in the work, their anger dissolving under the sun and the simple satisfaction of earning trust from animals and people alike. But the real heart of the ranch remained Caleb and Ash. Every morning, as the world awoke, Caleb would slip into the paddock and sit by the fence, notebook in hand. Sometimes he wrote in words. Sometimes he just sketched. Ash running at full gallop, Mira nosing for treats, Riley laughing with friends she never thought she'd make. Each page was a testament to healing, a story written in patience, setbacks, and small, steady triumphs. On the anniversary of the fire, the town gathered at Red Rock for an open house. The paddocks brimmed with laughter and music, the scent of barbecue in the air. Ray stood by the gate, shaking hands and accepting hugs. Maggie's photo hung in the barn, wreathed in wildflowers. Caleb gave a tour to the mayor, showing off the new therapy corral and sharing, with quiet pride, the story of Ash. As dusk settled and the sky burned violet, Ray stepped onto the porch and called for everyone's attention. "Some of you knew this place before it was famous," he said with a wry smile. "You knew what we stood for, a second chance for horses and for people. Now, thanks to all of you, we're just getting started. He turned to Caleb, handing him the microphone. Caleb hesitated, feeling hundreds of eyes on him. He glanced at Ash, who watched from the fence, tail flicking, posture calm. The Mustang's presence was all the encouragement he needed. Caleb spoke, slow, steady, and clear. A year ago, I didn't think I'd ever have a home again. I didn't think I'd ever speak again. But trust is what saved me. It saved Ash, too. Sometimes you don't need words to show what's in your heart. You just need to listen, to be patient, and to believe that the ones everyone fears might be the ones who can heal us the most. The crowd applauded, and a few people wiped tears from their eyes. The lesson was clear, echoing through the valley and out into the world. You don't need a voice to be heard. Sometimes the ones they fear are the ones who heal us most. That night, as the ranch quieted, Caleb slipped a bareback pad onto Ash and swung up. No saddle, no rope, just trust. They rode together along the ridge at dawn, hooves thundering softly over the earth. Both survivor and savior, boy and stallion, wild and whole. Trust is not taught. It's earned, one quiet step at a time. Like if you believe, silence can speak louder than words. Share if you've ever found comfort in something wild. Subscribe for more stories where trust heals the deepest wounds.